On the night the lighthouse nearly went dark forever, two hearts found a reason to keep glowing. Stay with this story until the final wave breaks, because what begins as a stormy night of loneliness becomes a quiet promise that changes everything. The night the storm arrived was not loud at first. It came quietly, almost respectfully, as if the sea itself were hesitant to disturb the lighthouse that had stood watch for generations. Rain began as a gentle tapping on the glass, slow and rhythmic, each drop blending into the next until it formed a soft curtain between the world and the keeper who lived inside. Thunder murmured far away, low and distant, like a sleeping giant turning in its rest. And at the center of it all stood the lighthouse, glowing steadily, its beams sweeping across the dark water in long, patient arcs, as it had done every night for longer than anyone could remember. Elias sat beside the narrow window, his chair worn smooth by years of use, listening not just to the storm, but to the silence inside himself. This was the hour when loneliness spoke the loudest, when memories crept in with the sound of rain, and when the past felt closer than the present. Yet something about this night felt different, as if the storm carried more than just wind and water. It carried change. Elias had chosen this life because it was predictable. The sea came and went, storms arrived and passed, and the lighthouse always needed him. There were no sudden questions here, no expectations, no painful reminders of the life he once lived. Before the lighthouse, there had been a city filled with noise and color, and a small apartment filled with laughter that ended too soon. He had loved deeply, and when love was taken from him by a quiet illness that did not care about promises or plans, Elias learned how fragile happiness could be. Grief followed him like a shadow, growing longer at night, heavier in the rain. So he left. He came to this place where the only thing that depended on him was a light, and where the ocean never asked for explanations. That evening, as Elias prepared for another long watch, he noticed something that made him pause. Through the rain-streaked glass, beyond the familiar darkness of the cliff path, there was movement. At first, he thought it was the wind bending the tall grass, but then he saw it again, slow, unsteady, unmistakably human. His heart tightened. No one walked these cliffs during storms. The path was dangerous even in daylight. He leaned closer to the window, straining his eyes, and saw the faint shape of a person struggling against the wind, drawn forward by the lighthouse beam as if it were a promise. Without thinking, Elias pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The cold struck immediately, sharp and alive, rain soaking through his clothes as thunder rolled above him. He called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind, and hurried down the stone steps. Near the edge of the path, half collapsed on a bench meant for summer visitors, was a woman. Her hair was dark and plastered to her face, her clothes heavy with rain, her shoulders shaking, not from cold alone, but from exhaustion and fear. When she looked up at him, her eyes held the raw relief of someone who had been searching for a sign and finally found one. Her name was Mira, though she spoke it softly, as if afraid the storm might take it away. Elias guided her back inside the lighthouse, his hand steady on her arm, the warmth of the interior wrapping around them like a held breath finally released. He gave her a blanket, set water to boil, and allowed silence to settle naturally between them. Outside, rain drummed against the windows, thunder echoing gently, but inside, the world felt smaller, safer. As Mira warmed, words began to flow, slowly at first, then more freely. She spoke of a life she had outgrown, of a love that had faded into disappointment, of a road trip meant to clear her head that ended with a broken car and nowhere to go. She admitted she had followed the lighthouse light because it felt like the only thing in the world that knew where it was going. Elias listened without interrupting, feeling something inside him loosen. He had forgotten how powerful it was to be heard, and how healing it could be to listen. In return, he shared his own story, not all of it, but enough. The loss. The leaving. The reason he chose a life where the light mattered more than his pain. As thunder softened into distant echoes and rain fell more gently, two strangers sat together, bound not by romance yet, but by understanding. And as the lighthouse beam continued its steady sweep, Elias realized that on this stormy night, the light had done something extraordinary. It had guided a lost soul to his door, and perhaps, quietly, guided him back to himself. When the storm finally sleeps. Morning arrived slowly, as if the night itself was reluctant to leave. The storm had softened into a fine mist that hovered over the sea, blurring the line between water and sky. Mira awoke on the small couch beneath the window, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of salt and old wood. For the first time in months, her body felt heavy in the best possible way, the kind of heaviness that comes from real rest, not exhaustion. Outside, the lighthouse beam had gone quiet, resting until nightfall, and the world seemed to breathe more gently. Elias moved carefully as he prepared tea, mindful not to disturb the calm. There was something sacred about the stillness of early morning after a storm, a sense that the world had been washed clean. When Mira joined him, their smiles were small but genuine, unforced, the kind shared by people who had survived something together, even if that something was simply a long night. They sat at the narrow table, steam rising from their cups, watching waves roll lazily against the rocks below. Conversation came easily now, drifting from simple observations to deeper reflections, and neither felt the urge to rush the moment. As the day unfolded, Mira stayed. At first, it was practical, her car would take time to repair, but soon it became something more. She helped Elias with small tasks around the lighthouse, learning its rhythms, its quiet language of maintenance and care. They walked along the cliffs in the afternoons, the wind cool but gentle, gulls crying overhead. Mira spoke about her dreams, once abandoned but not forgotten, and Elias listened, surprised by how much he cared. He found himself laughing again, a sound that felt unfamiliar but welcome, like hearing a song you loved long ago. Yet beneath the peace, there was fear. Elias worried about what it meant to let someone stay, to open a door he had sealed for years. Mira, too, carried doubts, about trusting again, about whether this calm was real or just temporary shelter. Then one evening, the sea reminded them that peace is never permanent. A powerful storm rose suddenly, fiercer than the one before. Wind screamed against the tower, rain struck like thrown stones, and the lighthouse generator faltered. The light flickered, dimmed, and fear rushed in with the darkness. Without hesitation, they moved together. Elias shouted instructions over the roar of the storm, Mira followed, hands steady despite her fear. They worked in near darkness, guided by flashes of lightning and trust. Every second felt fragile, every sound amplified by the storm's fury. And then, with a final surge of effort, the light returned, brighter, stronger, cutting through the rain like a promise kept. When silence finally fell, it felt profound. The storm drifted away, leaving the sea calm and the air clean. Exhausted, Elias and Mira stood side by side, watching dawn creep over the horizon. In that quiet moment, neither spoke, but everything was understood. They had faced the storm together, and something unbreakable had formed in its wake. Mira chose to stay longer than planned, not because she was lost, but because she had found something real. Elias chose to let hope live again, knowing it came with risk, but also knowing that love, like the lighthouse light, was meant to be shared. And as years passed, the lighthouse became known not just as a guide for ships, but as a place of peace, where storms softened and hearts healed. On rainy nights, when thunder rolled gently across the sea, Elias and Mira would sit together, listening, grateful for the storm that brought them together. Because sometimes, the deepest rest comes not from silence, but from knowing that when darkness arrives, you will not face it alone, and that the light will always return.